I didn't have any New Year's resolutions in 2019, but I did have a goal for myself, which is to read a book a week for the entire year. It's now the end of April, and in this video I'm going to look back on the books I've read and how it's impacted me. This is me in April, trying to make this video. At this point, I was unsure if I could keep up with reading at this volume, so I had decided to make several monthly update videos throughout the year, updating my progress. To say the least, I was a bit doubtful. At the beginning of the year, reading a book a week sounded like an impossible challenge to keep up with. But somehow I did it. This wasn't just one of those New Year's resolutions that fizzled out after a month. Reading became an essential part of my daily rituals, and I committed myself completely to this new habit. That's how in 2019, I read a book a week. With all the things I could have focused on in 2019, why books? They're quite a time commitment to read, they're not cheap, and they're not very easy to carry. Why did I do this to myself? The truth is, I enjoy reading. I think this is true for just about everyone, but in middle and grade school, I was an avid reader. I think because of the amount of time we got at school and the amount of incentives that were available to those who read all the time, I think that really motivated me and a lot of other kids my age to read at that time. But then when high school came, all of that time vanished, and so did my reading habit. I can blame school, but really it's my own fault because I haven't made time for reading in my life. For me, the act of reading is enjoyable. It's just that sitting down to read is the hardest part. Compare 30 minutes on my phone to 30 minutes reading, I think I would always pick the 30 minutes on my phone because whether I'm reading the news or watching YouTube or using social media or playing a game, no matter what I do, it has more stimuli and therefore it feels more productive than reading. In truth though, neither of them are inherently productive, they're both leisure activities. However, I found myself gravitating away from reading just because it felt boring. In a time where we are so inundated by digital content, I decided I had to prove that I could find time for books. That's why when 2018 was coming to a close, I decided to reprioritize reading. My goal was daunting at first, but a few simple techniques made it a lot easier. The first thing I did is I made a bullet journal spread for tracking my reading. The first day of 2019 was a Tuesday, so what I did is I made a chart and wrote down the dates of every single Tuesday. This chart allowed me to take a quick glance and see if I'm ahead or behind. The bullet journal spread helped, but I think the single most important step that I took toward reprioritizing reading was just using my time differently. It's unrealistic to think that just because I want to start a reading habit, I can add more time to my day. My day was already filled, so something had to be replaced so I could have a reading habit. Something that I use all the time but gives me very little value. Something I wouldn't feel bad about replacing. I know I hate on social media a lot, but that's not the only thing that I feel wastes my time. Personally, I think when I spend a lot of time on Google News or any game on my phone or Amazon shopping looking at my dream desk setup, I think all of that is not inherently bad, but in high volumes and frequently, it's just a waste of my time. I found that all of the small breaks throughout my day really added up. Car rides, haircuts, passing periods, all of that time, that could be time that I could use for something other than staring at my phone mindlessly. Over time, I actually found that a majority of my time spent reading didn't come from hours-long sessions with a book. They actually came from these 10 to 15 minute in-between periods between larger events in my life. Here's some very basic math. If I spent 30 minutes a day on my phone doing something that is classified as wasting time, I would have spent 182.5 hours in a year. I would say I read the average book in about 8 hours, so divide 182.5 by 8. That means in the span of a year, if I had replaced my social media time with reading, I would have read 23 books, which is almost half of my goal of reading a book a week. Every single lifestyle change I've made this year can all be attributed to books. Books like The Power of Habit or Essentialism or When, or various self-help and nonfiction books have completely changed my lifestyle. And all of that change has just come from my reorganization of my time. So obviously everyone has very different schedules, and it can be unrealistic to think that you have this much time to replace with reading. It can also be unrealistic to think that you can just start reading at a high volume. But I do think no matter who you are and what schedule you have, it is possible that there is some time in your day being wasted that could be reprioritized. I think about myself a week or a month or a year or maybe even a decade from now. What am I going to remember? Am I going to remember how much time I spent on Instagram or Amazon or Google News? Or am I going to remember reading The Power of Habit and how that completely changed my lifestyle? Personally, I think what I learned from a book is much more valuable than what I'll get from 10 minutes on my phone. That information from a book will remain important to me and stick with me and influence my future self much more than 30 minutes on social media or the news will. This is another personal opinion of mine, but I also prefer books to YouTube videos or podcasts just because of the sheer depth they can go into. A 10-minute YouTube video or a 50-minute podcast is not going to teach me what a 400-page book will. The sheer depth and detail of a book is infinitely more valuable to me than the little tidbits of information that I'm overrun with when I use my phone for 10 minutes. As with any new habit, you can't start all at once. So if you're interested in reading, I do have a few tips to help you start a reading habit and remain consistent. The first is to set your goals very low. And by low, I mean so low that it's impossible not to complete them. This can be anything and it's all subjective to you, but I would say like 10 pages a day or a chapter a day, something like that, where it's impossible for you to not find 10 minutes to complete that. This way you'll force yourself to stay consistent because it'll be embarrassing to not even be able to read 1 or 2 or 3 pages a day. After a few weeks of being consistent with this, you can gradually increase, and then over time, that habit of reading will build, and eventually you'll be reading a higher volume. The next one might seem obvious, but pick books you like. It's already hard enough trying to build a new habit, and forcing yourself to read a big, beefy, boring book about something you don't care about makes it even harder. If you read something you're interested in, you'll want to read, and that want will make you keep reading, and eventually you'll be reading at a very high volume. No matter what your interests might be, I think it's important to follow them at the beginning, and then eventually you can branch out and explore other genres. And don't be afraid to completely get rid of a book if you absolutely hate it. This one is a personal preference, but I don't buy books. I think that a lot of people get optimistic when they're at Barnes & Noble and they buy a lot of books. They all just get put somewhere. This means that when you go to start reading, you see the shelf and you just feel a little bit defeated because you have all these books to read that you haven't even started yet. To be fair, I do own some books, but I'm very intentional with my purchases and only buy books that I think will inspire me to read. Personally, I prefer to use the Kindle store or the online library to get digital loans. They don't have every single book available, but they have most of the ones I want, and this way I can always have a book on me, on my phone or on my Kindle. I think the most important thing to begin a reading habit is to make reading accessible at all times. This is why the Kindle app or a Kindle or just keeping a book in the car or with you at all times makes it easy to read when you find that little bit of miscellaneous time. It might not seem like much at first, but eventually this time will add up and you'll be reading at a volume that you didn't even think was possible with the schedule you have. Going into the new decade, a lot of people are going to be starting new habits, and I think that of all of the habits that I have started this year, reading is probably the most underrated. Even with all of the other ways to consume information in this age, reading just makes you slow down and focus. I would say that my reading experiment in 2019 really paid off. I've read 52 books this year, and I've learned things in countless different subjects. I'll definitely be doing something similar to this next year. Not sure if I'm going to be reading a book a week still, or if I'm going to try to increase the volume and challenge myself, but I think reading is definitely one of the most valuable habits that I could have at this age. So I encourage anyone watching this video to give it a try. Also, as I mentioned, I did read 52 books this year, so plan on some more reading content coming your way in the future. Also, if you're interested in seeing a full list of all the books I've read this year, click on the link in the description. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next year.